Good morning, folks. It's with great pleasure that myself, Bruce Wilson, and my colleague, Pascaline Menon from Monash, European Union Centre at RMIT, Europe and European Union Centre at Monash, we're delighted today to be able to welcome to speak to you Professor Donald Dingwell, who is the Secretary-General of the European Research Council. Those of you who have seen our promotional materials describing the event today will have seen that the ERC has very quickly become one of the preeminent research funding bodies globally. It's a relatively recent creation. Professor Dingwell will tell us more, but he's been in the role of Secretary-General since February 2011. Prior to that, he held research fellowships at the Geophysical Laboratory of Carnegie Institution of Washington and the University of Toronto, before being recruited to the German Bavarian Geo Institute, where he obtained his Venia Legendi in geochemistry in 1992. Before becoming Secretary-General, Professor Dingwell held positions at Stanford University, California Institute of Technology, and the University of Munich. Professor Dingwell is accompanied also this morning by Associate Professor Gemma Solomon and Dr. Gordana Popovic, but I'll leave Professor Dingwell to introduce them at the appropriate time. We're delighted to have you here and look forward very much to hearing what you've got to tell us today. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you to both of you for your kind words of welcome and introduction. And it's my very great pleasure and honor to be with you here today. And thank you very much for your attendance. I'm going to tell you a little story. Very simple. In principle, 5 minutes will suffice, but I'll use a little bit more. And it's the story of the European Research Council, ERC. And first, the most important thing to point out is that it is funding from the European Commission, but it is wholly unlike anything that you've ever heard from previous funding programs. It's a true break from the past, and therefore it has its whole new set of rules for participation, which are far, far easier and far, far more flexible than has been the case in the past. So if you have experience in European Commission funding through Framework Program 7 or perhaps Framework Program 6, and it is not through the ERC, then it's best that you forget it completely and just listen to the next 10 minutes of my words as I describe the ERC to you. So the ERC is an independent agency which receives its funding from the European Commission, and it's strategically led by independent scientists from across Europe. It sits in this building that you see in Brussels, where the sun always shines, on the top 4 floors of this shining building near the North Station of Brussels. It was created in 2007 with a budget of 7.5 billion euros for 7 years. These 7 years are drawing to a close at the end of this calendar year, and it will be reincarnated on the 1st of January for another 7 years with an increased budget that I'll show you in a moment. It's very important that there are 3 keywords that will always bring you back to orient you with respect to the ERC, and which will essentially answer many of the questions that you may be formulating. Number 1, it's individual grants. One person, one signature, all the responsibility for the funding which ensues. Second point is, it's bottom up. That means that there are no predetermined areas which you must fit into. There is no mission base of all of this. And you can apply for any area which will be viewed by a panel of your peers to be worthy of funding in terms of the scholarship and research potential. And the third point to make is that it's only excellence which is counted, measured, estimated, evaluated. There is no reference to added value for Europe. There is no reference to impact assessment. There is no reference to reducing fragmentation of the European landscape, and a dozen other things that you may have read in previous Commission funding programs. So it's very important to realize that with the creation of the ERC, the European Commission has moved to the center, to the core of research funding, and is no longer inhabiting the periphery where the national councils of Europe had essentially banned it to in years past. So you can imagine the creation of the ERC was quite controversial. You would be right. Here you see the pie of the entire funding budget for research of the European Commission of the 7 years coming to a close. The total was for 50.5 billion, and of that 15% was the IDEAS program. The IDEAS program equals ERC. It's the same thing. In Brussels, there's a nasty habit of giving one thing two names. You can see the way that the budget has been implemented. It was ramped up in a sawtooth fashion, such that in these weeks, which are closing out the last calls of the 7th Framework Program, we're closing 1.8 billion euros of funding for research. It's under the political jurisdiction of the Commission, as is the rest of the government of Europe. And the Commissioner for Research and Innovation is from Ireland. Her name is Moira Gagan-Quinn. You can see a picture of her here on this slide. The ERC Scientific Council is a collection of 22 prominent researchers from all fields who are each responsible for making sure that panels, to be able to evaluate the proposals which come in, are being filled on an adequate basis of excellence. These are not employees of the European Commission. They are not on a career ladder within the European Commission. They answer essentially, in terms of the spirit of their dealings, to no one in Brussels except themselves. Again, a highly controversial act by the government of Europe to set this up. Many people were convinced that this would fail horribly within the first 2 years. It has turned out to be the most exciting thing in research funding in Europe since the creation of the community itself. The 22 at the moment are sketched here for you. You can see various disciplines represented. Don't worry if you don't find your own discipline represented. You can nevertheless apply. It is important to realize that the 22 do not evaluate your proposal. They do not even see your proposal. They make sure that the panels are filled such that the panelists who do see your proposal have a reasonable coverage of all disciplines imaginable. The demand on the program has been quite substantial, but we've managed to keep the success rate above 10%. Above 10%. This is quite important. You know from the outset what game you're getting into when you take the time to write an application to the European Research Council with that success rate. The demand in the warm colors here are the junior grantees. It's growing in an unsustainable manner, doing everything we can to ensure that only the best will apply. On the right-hand side, in the blue colors, the senior grantees growing in a quite sustainable manner. Now, in the spirit of giving everything two names, the 8th Framework Program, the next 7 years of funding in Europe, is called Horizon 2020. And Horizon 2020 has taken several lessons from the existence of the European Research Council, and you start to see the culture of success of the ERC permeating out into the neighboring areas of the next framework program. And the pillars of the next framework program include excellent science, a name which is taken from the spirit of the ERC, industrial leadership, societal challenges, European Institute of Technology, and joint research centers. Now, you may be interested in any of these. I am only qualified to speak on the first, on the excellent science part of the 8th Framework Program. And if I break down excellent science in the second part of this slide, you see European Research Council with a budget under Horizon 2020 from 7.5 billion now raised to 13 billion euros. New money, it's fresh money. Nobody has their hands on this yet. It's not going to be distributed according to top-down priorities. It's not going to be distributed according to political agendas of the countries of Europe. It's going to be put at your disposal for application. When I say your disposal, I mean the researchers of the world. Everybody in the world is allowed to apply for this money. There's one catch. There has to be a catch. You must spend 50% of your time based at a European institution. In this, a European institution is defined as a legal entity within any of the member or associated states of Europe, which famously includes Switzerland, Israel, Turkey, Norway, Iceland, and so on. It's a pretty big club, and we would hope and expect that for each of you there's a way to find yourself a host institution there. The host institution that you will have to look for simply has to be a legal entity based in European or national law within Europe, which means it can be a university, and most of them are, but it can be a research center, it can be a hospital, it can be a museum, it can be a collection, it can be a company, it can be a private company within Europe. A very liberal definition of where you can be based to do this research. And here on the right, then you can see the comparison between old on the left and new on the right, and you can see that there is an incremental increase in the portion of the pie which is going to the ERC, but the actual increase of budget is a near doubling. And this is what we do. This is it. In fact, it can be stripped down to even less than 5 boxes, because the top 3 boxes are 95% of the money. The 2 bottom boxes are rather small programs in terms of their global budget. Let me describe the top 3 to you. They're divided up simply to protect the young. So on the upper left, you will see starting grants, which are for people from 2 to 7 years past PhD. In the middle, you will see consolidator grants, which are from 7 to 12 years past PhD. And on the right, in blue, you will see the advanced grants, which is for everybody else. In fact, we could call the advanced grants the open grant category, because every person alive on this planet may apply for an advanced grant from the ERC. Do the world's best apply? I'm going to give you a mixed answer, yes and no. Do Europe's best apply? Emphatically yes. You'll be competing with every single person who is of note and repute in your field anywhere near Europe. But when we look at the applications that have come from outside of Europe, we find the numbers are tiny. And my hypothesis is that nobody knew about this program, and it's been around since 2007. If I want to be rude, I can say you've already missed 7 calls. Okay? Number 8 is coming. Down on the bottom, there are 2 grant categories. One is synergy, 2 to 4 people. So a break with the pure concept of an individual grant. It's a pilot project. We give out a handful of these, no more. 2 to 4 people, up to 15 million euros for 6 years. Again, all the same criteria, 50% of the time based in Europe, and the quality checks will be the same as in the upper part of the diagram for the individual grant category. So there's really no reason to apply for a synergy grant unless you must, unless the compelling reason lies within the nature of the problem that you want to solve. And that's exactly how it was designed. On the bottom right is proof of concept. If you receive an ERC grant, you will not be asked in the initial application to discuss anything about the impact, about the commercialization potential, about the sectorial importance or the intersectoriality. You will be asked none of these questions whatsoever. Then you will be evaluated purely on the basis of being able to write this inspired document, this ERC proposal, of what your first priorities are for the next 5 years. If you get through the evaluation, then you will be asked, would you like a little more money in order to think about commercialization of some product arising from your research? We will pay the professionals to evaluate the process of bringing a product of your research to commercialization. So, very important is you can pay for any cost category of research. Any. As long as it is viewed by the panel who reviews it as a legitimate cost category. Of course, if you construct your grant and put in a cost category which nobody on the panel understands or appreciates, you're not going to make it through the evaluation anyway. But if you've made it through the evaluation, you've obviously made the right and wise and well-justified choices for research funding. They can be of any description necessary, in terms of personnel, in terms of equipment, and in terms of anything else surrounding those necessary to do the job. So I often get the question, what percent am I allowed to apply for equipment? And there is no answer to that question except between 0 and 100%. Same thing for personnel, same thing for consumables, same thing for travel, and so on. These grants are typically populated by 5.5 people per grant. That's the average. So we have 4,000 grants running, and we have 20,000 people in the ERC program now whose salary is being paid from the ERC. They can be of any level of seniority. One person is responsible for the grant, the so-called principal investigator. This person must spend 50% of their time based in Europe. The team can be anywhere they need to be. Anywhere they need to be. Do you need to justify where they are and why? Yes. Do you need to justify if they're all sitting in Melbourne? Yes. But you have the opportunity to do so. And it will not be held as a criteria against you, or an argument against you, that they are outside of Europe versus inside of Europe. The only thing that will be tested is the quality of your justification and your argumentation for the project. So an application from Melbourne is identical to an application from Munich. These are very prestigious grants. In the meantime, the universities of Europe and the research councils of Europe are measuring their success in terms of how many ERC grants they have. They've developed an unofficial ranking that we all joke about inside of the ERC. It's not of our making, but the thirst for having the statistics on the number of grants which go out to countries, regions, cities, and institutions is insatiable. Everybody wants to be up to date. And all the universities of Europe are competing with each other to get more of these ERC grants. If you want to write an ERC grant, you will have to find a host in Europe. You will have to find an institution who will administer the funds after your direction. Yeah? Very important, they will get 25% overheads. And very important is that almost anywhere that you would contact in Europe, I don't know a very long list of places that would not do it, will be immediately responding to your request for information. If you contact an institution in Europe with the intention of writing an ERC grant, they will answer your email quickly and they will inform you about what they have on resources to help you to apply. If you get a grant and you come from Australia and you spend 50% or 75% or 100%, whatever you choose, of your time based in Paris, they will put it on the front page of their university homepage the day you arrive. For them, it is a great honor and a prestige to have you come. Again, you see that we're pushing the emphasis away from all the rules of non-researchers as to how we conduct our research careers for everybody's benefit, and pushing it back into the community of researchers to define all of these rules. In a way, the ERC is a very dangerous idea. Very important is the portability. If you arrive in Europe at the institution of your choice, everything is set up, you're just about to embark, and you find out you made a horrible mistake for whatever reason, personal, institutional, climatic, I don't know. You can simply find another host. Once you have found that second host, you can move. The ERC will not ask you any questions. They will simply be your moving company. They will move you. And important is that the initial host, which was on your application form, has no right to keep you. They signed it away before you start your grant in an agreement. So there is free competition for the recipients of these grants, and there is a great competition between the hosts for these recipients. Do I need a position in Europe before I apply for one of these grants? No. You're welcome to get one, but you don't need one. There is no single model of employment which describes our principal investigators. They may be on a full-term tenured professorship in a European university, Most people applying from Europe are in that circumstance. They may be on a 5-year position, which just covers their employment for the grant. They may be offered a 5-year position as a result of a successful ERC grant application. Or they may be offered nothing except a chair and a desk, and you can pay your own salary through the ERC grant. You can define your own salary through the ERC grant as long as your host institution agrees. So this is a kind of freedom which I don't think the Western world has ever seen in terms of research granting. The panels will evaluate 2 things. They'll evaluate you, and they'll evaluate what you say you want to do. They do that on the basis of what you have provided them in 25 pages of the application process. When you describe yourself, you'll be putting in your CV, of course. For the seniors, we're only allowed to put in the last 10 years of our CV. But you will also be describing in a narrative of a couple of pages what your story is, what your unique background is, and why you, of all people, have proposed what you're about to propose in this research form. In other words, you have to make the case in a narrative, in text, about who you are and what you want to do. And then you will describe the research project and all the necessary detail. How detailed? What would you need to see in order to be comfortable about making the decision if you were on the review panel? Because you are on the review panel, there are people just like you. They can be from anywhere in the world. So in a lot of the unanswered questions that remain after my talk, remember, what you would like to have as the answer is probably very close to the truth, because this has been set up by people like you from the research community of Europe. There are 2 stages to the review process. In the first stage, 4 members of a 15-member maximum panel will read the first part of your proposal. The first part of your proposal contains the description of yourself, and it contains a few pages synopsis of the whole project. I can't emphasize strongly enough how important it is to write a good synopsis. You will be read by 30%. 4 members of the 15-member panel are going to read your proposal. They will not all be directly in your area of research, and therefore you need to write it in a way which will capture a broad audience and keep them interested in what you want to do. In the second stage, if you make it through the first, you will be reviewed by those 4 members of panel, the complete 25-page proposal, plus 4 external evaluators worldwide, which will be chosen on the basis of your proposal. So in principle, the system works such that you have more generalist evaluation in the first stage and more specialist evaluation plus generalist evaluation in the second stage. And in the perfect result, you get 8 opinions back of criteria B, which is the research proposal, and criterion A, which is you. And reading these documents is something that we should all have to do once in our career. Very important is if you're in the young or the intermediate grant category and therefore your track record is shorter, you will be invited to Brussels if you make it to the second round, flown into Brussels, all expenses paid, and you will be put in front of this panel for a half an hour. And that's it. You will be evaluated on the basis of your proposal plus your interview in front of this panel. And for young scientists, of course, this is quite an experience to go through. I wish I could go back and do it myself, but it's too late for me. The 25 names of the panels are here. This is, of course, the imperfect attempt to cover everything fairly. Most of you, 95% of you, will know immediately which panel might be interesting for you. You have the opportunity to apply to one panel. You also have the opportunity to apply to 2 panels. You can define it yourself. Either way, you will be evaluated by this number of people in the first round, as I described to you. These proposals can be reviewed by anybody in the world. It's not a European panel that you're in front of. It's often more than 50% European, nevertheless. That means that people from this city can easily be reading your proposal, or people from Brisbane can be reading your proposal. What you see here is a sketch of the nationalities of the countries of panel members host institutions. You can see the number of countries far outweighs the number of countries in Europe. So we've given out about 4,000 of these things. They work in about 500 different places in Europe. In Europe, there are about 1,000 universities. They're highly competitive, and as I said, only 12% make it through. In the future, if you just miss, you'll be able to apply again immediately 1 year later. If you miss by a little more and get a B ranking, you'll have to wait 1 year. And if you miss by a great deal and get a C ranking, you'll have to wait 2 years. And this is how we're trying to keep the success rates reasonable to keep our panels from being eroded away. About 50% of the people that get these grants work in only 50 places. You can guess the names of most of them, the most prestigious institutes of Europe. This is something which would be politically untenable in any other part of the European funding. And this is another hallmark of our system.